I'm here with Professor Jessica Kennedy, and Professor Kennedy is an expert in organizational behavior. Her research explores important questions about gender impact in negotiations and ethical decision making in the workplace. Welcome, Professor Kennedy.
Thanks, Dean Johnson. It's good to be here with you.
Well, it's a common saying that women don't ask. Is it true that women negotiate less than men? And can this help explain the gender pay gap?
It's such a good question because I know there was a book out a while ago that was really popular. And I think it was published from such a good place, but I'm really happy to tell you that that is a stereotype that has self negated. I think, women heard that, and I see today in really large samples that we no longer see a gender difference in propensity to negotiate. So I think it's a stereotype that's gone. What I do sometimes see is a really small difference in negotiation performance, but it's after just a little bit of practice, it disappears. And it's also true that it goes away when women negotiate on behalf of other people, or if we give them some information about the bargaining range, in other words, like what's possible in a negotiation. So I think negotiation training is really important for everyone, but I definitely don't think that any gender differences can explain the pay gap.
Interesting. So women have learned to ask.
Women have definitely learned to ask.
That's great. That's great. Well, negotiations can get really competitive, and people sometimes use deceptive tactics to, get to better outcomes. How does that use of deception and negotiation, change their outcomes or affect their outcomes?
It can be something that claims a little bit of value for people. So I definitely see the temptation in the classroom and outside of it to use those tactics. But we just conducted a series of studies that we have under review right now that look at the consequences for whether people are happy or guilty or anxious, kind of the emotional profile that emerges. And we see that while people do feel a little happier because of the typically better outcomes, the bigger effect is on guilt.
Hmm.
So after they lie in negotiations, even if it's with a stranger, even if it is ordered by the experimenter, in other words, they're given instructions or they have like a big incentive to do it, all those conditions don't matter. We see this big effect on guilt,
Hmm.
and then it impacts their satisfaction with the negotiation down the line. So when they go to choose counterparts in the future, if we look through a few negotiation rounds, we see that the guilt eventually goes away, but they still don't want to work with that counterpart that they deceived, even when the counterpart doesn't know. So it's kind of interesting to think that, hey, you're getting like this short term gain, but long term, like you've kind of ruined the relationship for yourself. So it's something I think negotiators need to think about.
That is amazing. Well, we're in the midst of a really active job market, and with that comes some opportunities to negotiate, certainly with new employers, but even your existing employers. What advice do you have for employers and employees in our current state?
Well, obviously, I'm usually advising the employees, so I think I'll start there. I think it's important for them to know that really the most of the work happens before they get to the bargaining table. So we think that negotiations all about like these skills that unfold while you're sitting there negotiating, but it's really important to prepare in terms of thinking through your own interests, setting some targets for what you would like to receive, setting a walkaway point, and then improving your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Do you know what you're going to do if you can't reach a good deal for yourself? That preparation, I think, is the most underappreciated part of negotiating for employees. For the employers, going back to the pay gap question that you had, I think it's important for employers to realize that they don't want to just blindly reward assertiveness, that it's really tempting when someone comes to them to negotiate, to be responsive. And I think that's such a great impulse that we have. But I think that's actually why we often see the pay gap emerge, because when women and men negotiate, we treat them differently. So I would encourage employers to really, set some policies, like pay for the position, and then do some pay audits. To be sure that some people aren't receiving more resources like just because they asked. We want people to be assertive on behalf of organizations, but the fact that they're just assertive on their own behalf, I think, is not necessarily who we want to promote.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Professor Kennedy. And thank you for watching Vanderbilt Business Live.